The late afternoon sun hung low over the mountains of British Columbia when 12-year-old Monica Jack pedaled her bike along the curve of Highway 5A. The water of Nicola Lake reflected streaks of gold, and the hills around it were quiet except for the occasional passing car. Monica moved with an easy confidence, the kind that came from growing up in a place where the forest pressed close but never felt threatening. She was close to home, close enough that her mother expected to hear her come through the door before supper. Drivers who spotted her along the road saw nothing unusual, just a girl enjoying the last light of the day. One man, headed north, noticed her pushing her bike gently up a slope. When he passed again in the opposite direction not long after, she was gone. In her place was stillness, the kind that makes a person instinctively check their mirrors, wondering if they missed something. He kept driving, uneasy, not yet aware that he had seen the last moment Monica was known to be safe. When Monica failed to return home, her mother stepped onto the porch calling her name. The silence that answered carried a tension she felt instantly. Within minutes, she was out on the road, scanning the shoulder, hoping to see her daughter's bike coming around the bend. Instead, searchers soon found the bike abandoned near a pullout. It stood upright, leaning slightly, almost placed rather than dropped. To the family and the officers who gathered there, it was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. There were no skid marks, no disturbed gravel, no scattered belongings. The scene looked untouched, and that lack of disturbance made the fear sharper. As daylight faded, volunteers arrived from nearby homes, ranches, and the small communities strung along the valley. They fanned out slowly at first, then with urgency, sweeping the brush and scanning the lakeshore with flashlights. The terrain around Nicola Lake was a mix of steep forested slopes, dense undergrowth, and uneven ground that swallowed footprints quickly. Search dogs worked the roadside but failed to pick up a clear trail. Helicopters circled overhead the next morning, their blades cutting through the calm air as teams below walked shoulder to shoulder, calling a name that never came back to them. Days passed without progress. Investigators interviewed anyone who had driven the highway that afternoon. Some recalled a dark-colored car pulled off to the side, but no one could place its exact make, or whether the driver had interacted with Monica. Others weren't sure they'd seen anything unusual at all. With each failed lead, the tension between hope and dread grew. Monica's family stayed near the search site, refusing to leave until someone found something that explained her disappearance. Nothing did. As weeks turned into months, the case shifted from active search to sustained investigation. Detectives revisited the scene repeatedly, trying to understand how a child could vanish so completely in such a short span of time. They considered animal encounters, accidents, and misadventure, but none fit the evidence. The bike's placement suggested human involvement. Still, no fingerprints, tire tracks, or physical clues pointed to who that person might have been. The community around Nicola Lake lived with the uncertainty. Parents became more cautious. Travelers who passed through the area often didn't realize they were moving along a stretch of road where a child had disappeared without a trace. For Monica's family, the seasons changed, but their world did not. Her mother kept her daughter's room as it had been, hoping that one day the door would open and the sound of footsteps she had listened for every night would finally return. 17 years after Monica vanished, the silence of the valley finally broke. In June 1995, a group working deep in the Nicola Valley made a discovery on a steep, wooded hillside. Human remains lay scattered across ground so remote and rugged that most people never traveled through it. Investigators were called in immediately. The location alone told them this was no accident. Someone had brought a body here intentionally, choosing a place where the elements and time would erase nearly all trace of what had happened. The forensic analysis took time, but when the confirmation arrived, It delivered the news that Monica's mother had feared and expected in equal measure. The remains were Monica's. The discovery closed one door and opened another, evidence of what happened, but still no answer to who had done it. With the recovery of her remains, the case surged back into focus. Investigators dug into decades of files, re-examined old suspects, and looked for connections to other disappearances in the region. Over the years, the province had seen cases involving indigenous girls and women that remained unsolved, and patterns that once seemed distant now appeared hauntingly familiar. Among the names considered was Gary Handlin, a man with a violent history who had been in British Columbia in the late 1970s. Advances in investigative techniques allowed officers to pursue strategies unavailable when Monica first went missing. Forensic review, psychological profiling, and interprovincial record searches all pointed toward a closer look at Handlin. The RCMP launched a Mr. Big undercover operation, an elaborate method where officers posed as members of a criminal organization to build trust and coax out confessions. Over months of controlled meetings, Handlin spoke about acts of violence, including statements investigators believed connected him to Monica's disappearance and death. In 2014, more than 3 decades after Monica's bike had been found at the roadside, police arrested Handlin and charged him with first-degree murder. The news rippled across British Columbia. For Monica's family, it was a moment they had imagined, but were never sure would come. When the trial began in 2018, the courtroom was heavy with the weight of time. Prosecutors laid out the undercover recordings, the circumstances tying Handlin to the area, and the details he had shared. Defense attorneys attacked the reliability of the Mr. Big method, arguing that the statements were shaped by pressure and manipulation. Throughout the proceedings, Monica's family sat quietly, listening as strangers recounted the last known moments of her life. They heard investigators describe how meticulously the suspect had concealed the crime and how the wilderness had protected the secret for nearly 2 decades. They heard the final steps that had led police to his door. In early 2019, the jury delivered its decision. Handlin was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The verdict closed the longest and most painful chapter of the case, but it could not erase the decades of unanswered questions. The road where Monica was last seen remained unchanged, quiet, scenic, and deceptively peaceful. The forest that had hidden her for so long still stood thick and silent. For those who remembered the search, the conviction brought closure, but not completion. A child had vanished in a place that seemed too open and too familiar for such a thing to happen. And even with the truth finally named, the mystery of those moments on the roadside lingered, suspended between the last time anyone saw her and the darkness that followed. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.